A 73-year-old wealthy mother is kicked out of her nursing home by her children, but she plans to teach them a lesson they will never forget. Helen Thompson was a woman who, at the age of 73, had lived through many challenges to build a successful life. A petite woman with silver hair and warm, wise eyes, Helen once held a position of admiration and respect in California's business circles. She was known not only for her intelligence and perseverance, but for her genuine kindness and dedication to those around her. Helen had spent decades building her business empire from the ground up, starting with a modest investment and growing it into a company that employed hundreds of people. It was her life's work, and she had poured her heart and soul into it. Despite her demanding career, Helen always prioritized her family. She had 2 children, Sarah and James, who had been her pride and joy from the day they were born. When their father passed away, Helen took on the dual role of parent, working tirelessly to ensure they never lacked love or support. She raised them with values of kindness, hard work, and empathy, often reminding them that wealth was only meaningful when it was used to help others and bring happiness to loved ones. As Sarah and James grew up, they each pursued successful careers of their own. Sarah became a corporate lawyer with a prestigious law firm, while James entered finance and thrived as an investment banker. Helen felt immense pride in their achievements, believing her sacrifices had been worth it to see her children secure and prosperous. With a sense of accomplishment, Helen decided it was time to hand over the family assets to Sarah and James, certain they would care for her in her later years, just as she had devoted her life to them. In a heartfelt decision, Helen transferred ownership of her company's shares, along with the family home and other properties, into Sarah and James's names. She trusted them completely, convinced that her children would never abandon her. Helen's health had started to decline, and she felt comforted knowing that her children would be there to support her, as family should. However, Helen's expectations were met with bitter disappointment. Once Sarah and James had control of the assets, their attitudes toward her changed. No longer needing her guidance or approval, they began to view their mother not as the cornerstone of their lives, but as a burden. Instead of sharing family dinners and laughing over shared memories, Helen found herself increasingly isolated, with her children visiting less and less frequently. What hurt most was the lack of affection, as they seemed more preoccupied with their own lives and financial gains. The ultimate betrayal came when they suggested that Helen move into a nursing home, citing her health and better care as the reason. Helen was heartbroken. She had dreamed of growing old surrounded by family, sharing stories, and passing down wisdom to future generations. But now her own children were sending her away, treating her more as an inconvenience than a beloved mother. At first, Helen tried to make the best of the situation, convincing herself that perhaps they were right, and that a nursing home might indeed be beneficial for her health. But the reality was far from her expectations. The home was sterile and impersonal, and the care, though professional, lacked warmth. Sarah and James rarely visited, and when they did, their interactions were brief and superficial. They seemed to have forgotten the countless sacrifices Helen had made for them, the nights she stayed awake nursing them through childhood illnesses, and the years she worked tirelessly to secure a future for them. As the months passed, Helen's hope that her children would come to realize the importance of family began to wane. One day, to her shock, the nursing home informed her that her payments were overdue, and that unless she or her family could settle the outstanding amount, she would be required to leave. Confused, Helen reached out to Sarah and James, but their responses were cold and dismissive. They claimed they were too busy and implied that she should find her own solution. Feeling both humiliated and betrayed, Helen finally understood the depth of her children's neglect. They had not only abandoned her but had also stopped supporting her financially, expecting her to manage on her own, despite her fragile health and advanced age. Alone and heartbroken, Helen gathered her few belongings and left the nursing home, wondering how her own children, her pride and joy, had come to treat her like this. In that moment, Helen made a vow to herself. She realized that the love and care she had once given so freely had not been reciprocated. Instead of wallowing in despair, she decided to take back control of her life. She would not let her children's betrayal define her final years. With a determined heart, Helen resolved to teach Sarah and James a lesson they would never forget, one that would show them the true meaning of loyalty, love, and gratitude. and this time she would do it on her own terms. Helen clutched her small bag of belongings as she took her first steps outside the nursing home. She was utterly alone, feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief at how her life had spiraled to this point. A successful businesswoman who had once held her family together, she was now a woman cast aside by the very children she had devoted her life to. The betrayal from Sarah and James cut deeply, and the disbelief of their callous actions burned in her mind. Yet, as Helen walked down the street, her sorrow began to harden into something else, a fierce determination to take control of her life and teach her children the value of family. With nowhere to go, Helen reached out to an old friend named Margaret, a confidante from her days in business who still lived in the area. Margaret, who had been one of Helen's closest friends during her years of success, welcomed her with open arms, offering her not only a place to stay, but also emotional support. Margaret was appalled by the story Helen shared and encouraged her to take action. It was in Margaret's cozy living room, with a cup of tea in hand, that Helen felt her resolve solidify. She would not be forgotten or discarded so easily. Helen knew that a simple confrontation would never be enough to make Sarah and James realize the gravity of their actions. She needed to reach them on a level they would understand, one that would force them to reflect on the pain and betrayal they had caused. Over the next few days, as she rested and regained her strength, Helen began to plan. This time she would leverage the same sharp mind and strategic skills she had once used to build her business empire. The first step was to regain control over the financial assets and connections she had relinquished. Although Sarah and James had stripped her of most of her properties, Helen had invested wisely throughout her career, and not all of her funds were in her children's hands. A portion of her investments was hidden in offshore accounts, and only Helen knew the details. Now she would tap into these funds and use them to lay the groundwork for her plans. Helen spent her days quietly but purposefully reconnecting with former colleagues, friends, and allies in the business world. She was surprised to find how warmly they welcomed her back and how eager they were to lend a hand. Many of them had respected Helen not just for her business acumen, but also for her integrity and kindness. Hearing her story stirred their empathy, and several offered to help her get back on her feet in whatever way they could. Through these contacts, Helen began gathering resources to initiate a discreet investigation into her children's financial dealings and current lifestyle. She knew that Sarah and James were successful in their own right, but she also knew they had developed expensive tastes and maintained a lavish lifestyle. Over the years, they had become dependent on the money she had entrusted to them, taking it for granted and investing poorly. Helen's investigator confirmed that both Sarah and James were stretched thin financially, living beyond their means under the assumption that their mother's wealth would be theirs to rely on indefinitely. With this information, Helen decided on a course of action that would strip away their comfort and security, just as they had so thoughtlessly stripped hers. But more than that, she wanted them to understand what it meant to truly value family and loyalty. It would be a lesson in humility, one they would never forget. As Helen's plan took shape, she consulted with a trusted lawyer who helped her arrange the transfer of her offshore assets back under her control. She intended to set up a foundation in her own name, a foundation dedicated to supporting elderly individuals who had been neglected by their families. The foundation would use her reclaimed wealth to fund housing, healthcare, and companionship programs for seniors in situations similar to hers. This would be her legacy, rather than leaving anything to her children who had turned their backs on her. Margaret watched in admiration as Helen navigated each step of her plan with strength and resolve. The two friends spent long evenings discussing Helen's vision, and Margaret encouraged her, reminding her of her worth and the importance of teaching her children a lesson that went beyond money. The day eventually came when Helen was ready to put her plan into action. With her lawyer by her side, she finalized the documents that would prevent Sarah and James from inheriting anything else from her estate. Helen knew that they would soon realize their mistake, but it would be up to them to decide how to respond to the truth about their mother's legacy. As Helen finalized her legal groundwork, her mind filled with memories of her children when they were younger, their laughter, their innocence, the way they used to cling to her and call her mommy with such unreserved love. The memories were bittersweet, but they strengthened her resolve to make them understand the pain of betrayal and the invaluable worth of family. Now, with the help of her trusted lawyer, Thomas, she set out to begin the process of reclaiming her assets. Thomas had been a loyal friend and advisor to Helen for many years. When he heard her story, he felt a mixture of anger and sympathy and agreed wholeheartedly to assist her in her endeavor. The first step was to examine the legal loopholes that would allow Helen to regain control over her financial and business interests. Sarah and James might believe they were untouchable, but Helen's foresight in retaining a certain level of control in her company meant that her return was more feasible than they would ever expect. In one of their meetings, Thomas outlined the steps to recover her assets. They would move discreetly, gathering the necessary legal documentation to reclaim shares and dissolve financial ties between her and her children. Helen felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, part of her still yearned for the closeness they once shared. But she knew that teaching them this lesson was necessary for them to understand the meaning of loyalty, respect, and love. Helen was not satisfied with reclaiming her wealth alone. She understood that true change could only come from within. With careful planning, she orchestrated a series of chance meetings with Sarah and James, intended to challenge their perceptions and make them confront the reality of their actions. She wanted them to remember the love and sacrifices she had given them, and to see her not just as a means to wealth, but as the mother who had stood by them through every hardship. The first encounter was with Sarah. One morning, Helen arranged for them to cross paths at a local charity event that Sarah attended. Helen, looking confident and composed, made her way through the room, connecting with various guests. When Sarah saw her mother, she looked surprised, then uncomfortable. Helen seized the moment, casually joining Sarah at her table and engaging in small talk. "Sarah, do you remember when you were young, and we used to volunteer at the shelter every summer?" Helen asked, her voice soft yet penetrating. Sarah, caught off guard, nodded uncomfortably. "Yes, I remember those summers," she replied, her tone distant. "I taught you back then that kindness is priceless," Helen said, her eyes meeting Sarah's. "It was the one lesson I hoped you'd carry with you for life." Sarah shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. Helen's words lingered, stirring memories Sarah had buried beneath her ambitions. She remembered those summers, but she also remembered the sacrifices Helen had made for her and James, and she could feel the weight of that sacrifice now as her mother's words echoed in her mind. Next was James. Helen knew that James often dined at an upscale restaurant in town, so she decided to visit him there unexpectedly. She arrived at the restaurant one evening and walked in with quiet confidence, finding James seated at a table with friends. Seeing her, James looked visibly startled. After a brief hesitation, he stood to greet her, though his expression remained guarded. "James," Helen began, her voice calm but unyielding, "I wanted to see how you've been. It's been so long since we shared a meal together." James forced a smile, waving his friends off politely so he could speak with her in private. As they talked, Helen reminded him of the values she had instilled in him from a young age, the importance of family, hard work, and humility. She recounted the long nights she had spent at the office, working tirelessly to provide for him and Sarah after their father passed away. "Do you remember, James, the nights we'd spend going over your school projects?" Helen asked. "I used to sit with you, even after working a full day, to make sure you felt supported." James looked away, a trace of guilt in his eyes. He mumbled a response, but Helen could see that her words were beginning to reach him. Though he remained guarded, the memories she brought up had clearly shaken him, reminding him of the selflessness and dedication she had shown him throughout his life. As Helen continued her encounters with her children, her words planted seeds of reflection within them. Sarah found herself waking up at night, haunted by memories of her mother's sacrifices, of the love that had once felt unconditional and unwavering. She began to realize how distant and selfish she had become, and she couldn't shake the feeling of regret that gnawed at her. James, too, found himself revisiting the memories of his youth, nights spent working on school projects with his mother, her pride in his achievements, and the warmth of her praise. He remembered the way she had been his biggest supporter, cheering him on at every milestone, never once asking for anything in return. With each encounter, Helen's message grew clearer. She was more than a mere benefactor. She was their mother, a role that carried far more value than any monetary wealth could provide. Her words lingered in their minds, chipping away at the walls they had built between themselves and their past. The final phase of Helen's plan involved inviting Sarah and James to her attorney's office. She requested that both of them attend a meeting, under the pretense that she had one last document to share with them. The message was vague enough to spark their curiosity, and despite their lingering discomfort, they arrived at the scheduled time. Helen sat across from her children, her lawyer by her side, and a thick file in front of her. She began by recounting the years she had spent building her empire, the sacrifices she had made, and the dreams she had held for her family. Then, with a steady voice, she laid out the legal steps she had taken to reclaim her assets, emphasizing that her wealth would no longer be passed down to them unconditionally. "This isn't about punishment, Sarah and James," she said, her voice softening as she saw the confusion and hurt in their eyes. "It's about teaching you the value of what we had, what we still could have, if you truly cared." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time Sarah and James were forced to confront the truth. Their mother, the one person who had always given without expecting anything in return, was now withholding from them in a way they had never anticipated. As the family gathered in Helen's spacious but now solemnly quiet living room, the weight of the moment seemed to press down on everyone. The ornate chandelier cast a dim glow, and every decorative detail in the house that once felt welcoming now seemed cold, emphasizing the distance that had grown between Helen and her children. Sarah and James exchanged uncertain glances, wondering what this important family meeting could mean. They could see their mother seated at the head of the room, poised and resolute, her usually gentle face set with an unyielding expression that neither of them recognized. In the past, she had always been the forgiving one, bending to their needs, offering her love and support without question. But today, something was different. Helen looked at them with a quiet intensity before she spoke, her voice steady. "I've come to a decision," she began. Her words hung in the air, catching the attention of Sarah and James, who sat up in anticipation, both of them still assuming this had something to do with their expected inheritance. Helen continued, "For years I poured my heart and soul into building not only my business but also our family. When your father passed away, I promised him I would care for you both, protect you, and ensure you had a future filled with opportunities." She paused, a touch of sadness creeping into her eyes. "And yet, somewhere along the way, I seem to have lost both of you." Sarah and James exchanged uneasy looks, unsure of how to respond to their mother's solemn tone. Helen took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew this moment would define the legacy she was leaving behind, and most importantly, the lesson she hoped to impart. "In recent years, I've come to understand that family isn't about money or titles. It's about loyalty, love, and respect," she said, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "It's about being there for one another, not just when it's convenient or profitable, but always. And unfortunately, despite all the love I've tried to show you, I feel as though I have failed to instill those values in you." Both Sarah and James looked away, their faces flushed with embarrassment, yet unable to hide the slight resentment simmering beneath the surface. It was true that they had distanced themselves from Helen, but neither had imagined she would confront them this way. Helen cleared her throat, her face softening just slightly. "I've spoken with my lawyer, and I've decided that my wealth, the business, and all the property your father and I worked so hard to build will be given to causes I hold close to my heart." Her voice grew stronger with conviction. "Every dollar will go to charities, to community projects, to people who value kindness and support in the same way I once hoped we did." The room fell silent. Sarah's face paled as she stammered, "Mother, you can't be serious. This is our inheritance. Everything Dad and you worked for, it's supposed to be for us, your children." "Yes, we're your family," James added, his voice laced with disbelief and anger. "How could you turn your back on us like this?" Helen looked at them, her gaze unyielding. "Turn my back on you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper yet sharp with disappointment. "I have always been here, waiting for you both to see me as more than a source of wealth, more than an old woman with fading value. But in my darkest moments, when I needed my family, you both were absent." Sarah's hands trembled as she clenched them in her lap. "We were busy, Mother. We have lives of our own," she insisted, though even she could hear the hollowness of her words. "I understand that," Helen replied softly. "But love isn't conditional. Family is not meant to be an arrangement of convenience. You were willing to cast me aside, as though I were nothing, when I was the one who sacrificed everything to build this life for you." James, frustrated, tried to argue. "This isn't fair. We're your children, we deserve." "What you deserve," Helen interrupted, her tone sharp, is to understand the consequences of neglect and the real meaning of family. And if I leave you nothing, it's because I love you enough to let you learn this lesson." A tear escaped Sarah's eye as she finally looked her mother in the eye, seeing not just an elderly woman but the fierce, loving parent who had once held them through every storm, who had carried them with unwavering strength. She realized then that her mother's words weren't motivated by bitterness, but by a deep, painful love, a love that wanted them to understand their mistakes so they wouldn't repeat them. "James, now visibly shaken, murmured Mother, "Please, there has to be another way. We didn't mean to push you away." Helen's eyes softened just a little as she nodded. "Perhaps you didn't mean to, but your actions speak louder than intentions ever will. I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing this so that you can learn what I hope will be the most valuable lesson of your lives." The lawyer, who had been silent until now, took this as his cue. He laid a stack of documents on the table, each detailing the various charities and foundations that would benefit from Helen's estate. Helen's voice was soft as she explained, "These organizations will use what I've worked for to help people who need it most, those who will never take kindness for granted, those who understand the power of giving and love." Sarah broke down in sobs, her carefully composed demeanor shattering. "Mother, I'm sorry," she whispered, the words tasting bitter but somehow liberating. "I'm so sorry for everything. I never realized, I thought there would always be more time to make things right." Helen moved to her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Time is a gift, Sarah," she said softly, "and it's one that we don't often realize we're wasting until it's too late." James, visibly remorseful, nodded. "I understand, Mother. I really do. I promise to make this right. Even if we can't change your decision, we can change our own choices going forward." Helen smiled, her heart aching yet filled with hope. "That's all I wanted to hear," she replied. "To know that you'll carry this lesson forward even after I'm gone. Money and inheritance, they're only temporary. But love, compassion, and understanding, that's the legacy I wanted to leave behind." As she rose to leave, both Sarah and James stood with her, and for the first time in years, Helen felt the warmth of their presence, not as mere shadows but as her children, the people she had loved so dearly and had sacrificed so much for. They accompanied her out of the house, each lost in their own thoughts, each finally understanding that wealth was meaningless without connection, and that family bonds, though fragile, were worth mending. And as Helen stepped into the fading light, she left with a quiet sense of peace, knowing that perhaps, just perhaps, the seeds she had planted would one day bloom into something far more valuable than any inheritance she could have left behind. In the weeks following the reading of their mother's will, Sarah and James's lives felt irrevocably altered. The once looming fortune they had anticipated was gone, leaving only the profound silence of what they had lost, not just in wealth but in the love they had taken for granted. The realization of their mother's intentions, though harsh, had finally sunk in, and they felt the weight of her message in ways they could never have imagined. For the first time in years, Sarah found herself revisiting the memories of her childhood. She recalled the days when her mother would sit with her late into the night, guiding her through homework or soothing her fears. James, too, remembered the unwavering support his mother had shown him in difficult times, never hesitating to lend a hand or offer a word of comfort. In their hearts, the image of Helen grew, not as a distant, frail woman they had relegated to a nursing home, but as the strong, selfless mother who had once been the center of their lives. It was a revelation both painful and necessary. They began to grasp the essence of the life lesson their mother had intended for them, a lesson in love, gratitude, and the importance of family bonds over material wealth. One morning, as they met over coffee, Sarah broke the silence. "I can't keep living this way," she said softly, her eyes downcast. "The emptiness, the regret, I feel like I owe Mom so much more than I ever realized. All she wanted was for us to be there, and we pushed her away." James nodded, his face a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I feel the same. It's time we stop seeing what we've lost and start seeing what she left us, her values, her strength. Maybe it's not too late to honor her memory." The two siblings began discussing ways to turn their remorse into action. They decided to volunteer at a local shelter for the elderly, recognizing the importance of family bonds and support in ways they never had before. Each time they saw a lonely senior resident, they thought of their mother and the isolation they had let her endure. As they spent more time helping others, Sarah and James began to feel a gradual but genuine transformation within themselves. For the first time, they were acting on values their mother had tried to impart: kindness, empathy, and selflessness. Through their efforts, they hoped to atone for the pain they had caused and honor Helen's legacy. Eventually, they founded a small community initiative, a foundation in their mother's name aimed at supporting elderly people without families and encouraging family connection. The foundation became a place for families to share experiences and a support system for those who felt isolated. The endeavor gave them purpose, a way to continue growing from their mother's life lesson, and a chance to heal the fractured relationship they'd had with her memory. As the months passed, the community recognized their foundation's impact, and Sarah and James began to feel a sense of fulfillment they hadn't known before. Each time they reached out to someone in need, each family they helped reunite, felt like a tribute to Helen's enduring values. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Helen's passing, they held a small memorial ceremony to honor her. Surrounded by friends, neighbors, and the people they had helped, Sarah spoke softly to the group, her voice carrying the weight of their journey. "We lost our mother long before we lost her physically," she began, her words filled with emotion. "She tried to teach us what truly mattered, but we were blinded by our own lives. In her final act, she showed us that wealth is meaningless without love, and that family is a treasure beyond any inheritance." James added, "We've come to understand that her legacy isn't in money or assets, it's in the love and compassion she left behind. Our mother, Helen, gave us a second chance through the lesson of her passing, and we're dedicating ourselves to sharing that lesson with others." The audience, moved by their heartfelt tribute, applauded. In that moment, Sarah and James felt a sense of peace and connection they hadn't experienced since their mother's passing. They understood now that Helen had never abandoned them, but had left them with something far more valuable than wealth: the tools to create a life of meaning, connection, and service. As they walked away from the memorial, they felt a warmth in their hearts. Their mother's love and guidance would always be with them, inspiring them to lead lives that honored her memory. In their mother's absence, they had finally learned the depth of her love, a gift that would continue to shape their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. The story ends with Sarah and James quietly embracing the life their mother had hoped they would lead, finding fulfillment in helping others, and sharing the love that had once been hidden beneath layers of ambition and selfishness. Helen's legacy lived on through their newfound purpose, a testament to the enduring power of love and family. Thank you for joining us in this heartfelt journey of love, regret, and redemption. Through Helen's story, we're reminded that true wealth lies not in money, but in love, family, and compassion. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if it inspired you to connect with your loved ones a little closer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for more stories that touch the soul. Together, let's spread the importance of love and family.